What's up? This is my first podcast episode, and so I want to briefly introduce myself as well as the topic of today's video before we get started. I also want to say, if you do decide to listen to this podcast, thank you for your trust. And as this is my first podcast, if you have any feedback on what I can improve, please let me know so that I can do an even better job next time. So my name is Daniel, also Dan. And so far I've spent my life pursuing a typical business career. And it's only recently that I discovered and also admitted to myself really that I don't think that is going to lead me to my ultimate satisfaction with life. And so I've more recently started to unravel which decisions led me to this place, but also which potential actions I can take in the future, be it in my job, be it outside of my job, to move towards what I think will be a more fulfilled and happier life. But more on that another time. Because even though I am now in the place that I am, I also think that there are some things in my life that I did very right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the good and loving relationship that I have with my parents, that I'm fortunate to have with them. I wouldn't have graduated best in class in my business degree. And I probably also wouldn't have the self-confidence to talk to you right now and to even try this in the first place. And I therefore want to talk about 10 things and learnings that I think I did do right in my life. Just want to make it very clear, it's not tooting my horn, I'm just openly reflecting here. There are also a lot of things that I think I could have done differently, and I will talk about those another time. But today I want to focus on what the things are that I did right from my personal perspective. All right, so number one is that I went to therapy multiple times. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family and an environment where going to therapy isn't stigmatized and isn't seen as something negative, but rather as a way to improve yourself and to seek out help when you need it, just the way you would go see a doctor if your leg was broken. But what I want to talk about personally is why I think that going to therapy is important, and also give you an example of when I did and when it helped me a ton. And so I am a person that typically tries to solve their problems on their own. You know, it's something I also take a fair amount of pride in, that I try to solve things myself. But sometimes that just doesn't work out, and you try again, and you just keep on failing. And my example for that is a pretty hefty nicotine addiction that I had last year, or that I had developed last year. And then you might think, you're the guy that just cycled around Italy. How on earth did you develop a nicotine addiction? And that's a good question. But basically what happened is I was working my job that was very high-paced, long hours, very stressful, and also took away my typical compensation mechanisms, which are sport, spending time with friends, sleeping enough, just because I was working so much. And so over time, to numb this pain, I just started consuming more and more nicotine. And what started out as the occasional vape, so like think a vape every 2 weeks when I'm going out, quickly turned into 4 disposable vapes a week, which is the equivalent of probably 4 to 5 packs of cigarettes. So a lot. And as I said, I tried quitting over and over again. You know, I threw them away, said I wouldn't buy them anymore, and yet every week I found myself in another shop buying a new vape. Even went so far that I told my roommate to seize them from me when he saw me vaping, which he very much did. Once he even threw one out of the window. But that didn't stop me from just going to buy another one. And so after, 5-6 months of being in this vicious loop, I realized, okay, I am not going to fix this by myself, because I tried and I failed miserably. It just got more. And fortunately, I had heard about hypnotherapy as a way to quit vaping or nicotine consumption in general. And so that is what I then proceeded to try. I sought out a hypnotherapist based on the recommendation of a friend and booked 3 sessions with them. And the cool thing is that even after the first session already, where we only did 10 minutes of hypnosis, we'd previously figured out, the underlying beliefs, etc., etc., I had no craving to even vape anymore. No, and that means that I had gone from vaping 4 vapes a week. That's a lot. I basically vaped 5 days out of 7 to not even craving a vape anymore. And today it's over a year that I haven't consumed a single hit of nicotine, no nicotine pouch, no nicotine gum, no nothing. And so yeah, I think that is just one example of others that I've had as well, where admitting to yourself that you're not gonna solve the issue by yourself, and then having the strength to say, okay, I can't, but what I can do is look for someone that will help me solve that thing, how that is actually strong, and often helps you figure things out that you might not be able to do by yourself, but if you just solve them in any way, including the help of other people, it's just as good, you know? Yeah, it would be great if you can solve it yourself, but I can't always. And so I just get the help of other people by going to therapy. Now, number 2 is probably going to ruffle some feathers, but it's sleeping around and experimenting sexually. And I don't want to go into the details because I think it's a bit too personal, but I want to talk about the bigger picture and why I think that it was important for my personal development. So I would say that sleeping around probably goes counter to society's average expectations of what you should do as a good person, right? I think our ideal picture in society is still, and it's developing, but it is still find your partner, fall in love, and stay in a monogamous relationship. And so that's also the society that I grew up in, with the exception that I was fortunate enough to have some micro bubbles that think a bit differently. I think both when I grew up, but also then especially when I became an adult and was also able to pick and choose the bubbles that I put myself in. And I just naturally, growing up, already had a probably bigger interest in the topic than other people, you know? And now you could say, if I had just been socialized normally, I would have probably gone on to pursue that path of a normal relationship and like not, you know, deviating too far from that. Fortunately, I think I did. And that led me to experiment a lot. I was fortunate enough that I also had the opportunity to, which was also because I took care of myself, etc. But what I ultimately learned in the process, and why I think that it was so important that I pursued this desire of mine, is that at the beginning, I did it out of ego. I mean, I think that's normal when you're 16, 17 and you sleep with someone, you go and tell your mates and they're gonna go like, mate, that is so sick, right? And so you have this positive reinforcement mechanism that just tells you sleeping with someone equals good. I think there's nothing wrong with that per se, but over time, as you repeat the experience a few times, I learned that this specific motivation of doing it became less and less fulfilling, and I also started questioning if it was intrinsically actually something positive, or if it was not, if it was bad. And that was also because of some external influence where people told me like, hey, I think what you're doing is pretty fucking weird. Now, there was some people that were pretty close to me, and so I took their feedback and actually thought about it. You know, and by doing that, I realized that a part of it was ego-driven. I was just doing it for external validation. And I don't think that's bad, but it was not a pattern that I wanted to keep for myself. And so at some point I decided to think about why I was really doing it, what I wanted out of it. And what I figured out was that for me, it was just a means to be closer and more intimate to another person, which puts the other person at the center of the experience. And what I mean by that is that whereas previously, maybe because it was a cool situation, maybe because the other person was particularly hot, I would just sleep with them because of this scenario. Even if I didn't find them particularly interesting, didn't like them a lot, like I never slept with anyone that I didn't like, but you get the point. Nowadays, that has changed in that my time is so precious to me and my attention span that I really think about any person that I engage with, and that includes now people that I sleep with. Basically, if I would not be spending time with a person, if nothing were to happen, I have now stopped sleeping with these people that I had previously slept with out of ego and drive and, getting, the positive reinforcement. And this has led me to much more fulfilling relationships. I experience a lot more peace around the topic. And yet, I do not think that I would have ever ended up in this place where I can look at my desires, understand them to a larger extent, and say, hey, I don't want to do that, but I think that this part over here is actually nice for me. And that's something that I do want to pursue very purposefully and very mindfully. And so, yeah, I think had I not experimented a lot, that would have never happened. And so I encourage myself, really. I don't want to give advice here. Just want to talk about me and my experience. But I think it goes along the line of what I heard Naval, who's a big podcaster, say the other day, which is, if you want to win at a game, just go and win at it and play it, because then you're free of it. I'm paraphrasing here. But basically the idea was, if you have a desire and it persists over a long period of time and it doesn't change, then you probably just have it, and then you should just go after it and achieve it. Because this, being free of the game after achieving it, or after playing for all the levels, feels very true to me. I don't have pressure anymore. I'm a lot freer, and I think the same is true for some other desires as well. Okay, let's do a quick one. Maintaining and nurturing a good relationship to my parents was something I did. And we all, if we are lucky in the first place, only have two parents, right? Maybe you're free if, your parents split up. But point being, if you are as lucky as I am to have your parents, to have them alive, and to also have a good relationship with them, I think you and I are very lucky, And obviously there's going to be friction at certain points in life with your parents, at least there was with mine. But it's a relationship I cherish a lot, and where I know that if I don't use the time that I have with them now, be it by, recently went on a weekend getaway with my parents that I initiated, or I spend time at home. The other day I baked cookies with my mom. And all of these are very conscious choices I'm making, where I'm asking myself, hey, what are some experiences that I want to live through with my parents, as long as, they can do stuff, as long as I can do stuff. And also whilst I'm here in Germany, in Freising, where I'm sitting right now. So yeah, I think nurturing your relationship to your parents throughout your life, very important. I was gone for a lot of time. I lived in the States for 2 years, and I just made sure to call them once a week. Maybe it might be more often for yourself. Maybe it's less frequently. But just making sure you maintain these relationships. Again, if you're lucky to still have your parents, if you're lucky to have a reasonable relationship to your parents, I bet there's exceptions where, distancing yourself from your parents can make sense as well. But that again just reinforces the point that when you are lucky, like myself, and probably and hopefully many of you, it can just be a lovely thing to be good friends with your parents. Now, learning number 4 is consciously exposing myself to very difficult and uncomfortable situations. And I want to first talk about how I discovered this thing, and secondly, a few examples of when I did it and how I did it. Now, I was fortunate enough, in a way, that when I was roughly 12 years old, my parents decided to move to the north of France, to Lille, which is in the Nord-Pas-de-Calais, very close to Belgium. And at the time, I was 11, 12 years old, 6th grade, didn't speak a word of French. My English was okay, but not great. I was 11. And I really didn't want to go, because I had all my friends here, And so basically for the first year, I just told my parents to, wasn't very happy, let's just say it like that, and did nothing to integrate. You know, I did the exact opposite, even though I had people approach me and try to integrate me in school and stuff like that. But almost moved back after year one, and then came back due to like family circumstances. So we almost moved back to Germany, then stayed in France. And from that point onward, I started really trying, learning French, making friends, joining sports clubs, etc., etc. And within that 1 year, I made so much progress, not just in the languages, but as human, because I was in a new environment, I was making new friends from all sorts of backgrounds, new school system, new sports, etc., etc. And when I then moved back to Germany in my 8th grade, it just became like so evident to me how much progress in these regards I had made as a human being. Just because everybody else had done the exact same thing for 2 years. And I came back and all of a sudden I spoke perfect French, perfect English. I had friends from everywhere. I had been to new school system, etc., etc. And even though this period was incredibly painful at times, seriously, I realized just how big of a jump I had made, you know, and I probably only admitted this or like really realized this like 2 or 3 years after we had returned, but it just became so starkly obvious to me that by being put, and at the time it was my parents putting me in that situation, I don't know if consciously or unconsciously, I never asked them, but by putting me in that situation, I all of a sudden had a turbocharge in development and skills. And now I want to talk about how I then took this insight and continued using it, because I have. And the first example, let me think about which example I want to talk about for a second. Okay, so, and I think the most evident example of that was when, after finishing my high school degree, I was doing a gap year, right? And one of my internships just ended because the investor canceled investing into the startup. So all of a sudden I didn't have a job. I was just like, okay, what do I do now? And I'd always wanted to learn Spanish. And so my dad was like, why don't you just fly to Latin America and learn Spanish? And believe you me, at the point in time, I maybe spoke like 5 words, including paella and por favor. You know, so I really didn't speak Spanish. Nevertheless, I liked his idea. And so I looked into flights to a place where I could fully immerse myself in an environment where nobody speaks English, because that would, in my mind, force me to speak Spanish and to learn it as quickly as possible, because otherwise every day would just be a pain in the bum. So what I ended up doing was flying to Cuba. And just to give a timeline, like I had the idea on Tuesday, or like I talked to my dad on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I did the research and called the company. On Thursday, I booked, and then on Saturday or Sunday, I flew to Cuba. So when I arrived there, I was like, why are there so many old cars? And I didn't even know they still had socialism. But my thesis proved to be very, very true, because after just 3.5 weeks of living in Cuba, I had a B1 level in Spanish, which is conversational. So I went from needing an hour and a half to find cheese on my very first day in Cuba to being able to have a fully blown conversation in Spanish after 3.5 weeks. Of course, I took 6 hours a day of individual lessons. I studied after lessons every single day. So it didn't just come easily to me, but I would have never, ever been able to achieve the same result had I just gone to Valencia or Barcelona, because people will just speak English to you there. And this pattern of deliberately choosing an environment that is very hard and is going to challenge you, but hopefully not break you, is something that I repeated over and over again. Now, lesson number 5 goes roughly in the same direction, but isn't the same thing. And that is that throughout my life, starting with France, I moved a lot, and I moved very far away as well, occasionally. And let me quickly talk about where I moved. So obviously France with my parents. Then I studied my degree in Reutling, which is near Stuttgart. I did an internship in Berlin, subsequently continued my bachelor's degree in Boston, internship in New York City. Then I did an internship in Bangalore, and ultimately I now moved back to Munich. And why did I make this choice to continuously move when I, as many people do, already had friends and the bubble in the city that I had been, you know? And I think aspect number one, when I moved the first time by myself to Reutling near Stuttgart, I wanted to go somewhere where I was far enough from my parents that they cannot help me in every situation. If I lived in Munich and my light bulb had a problem, my dad would just pop by after work and fix it for me. By choosing to live in Reutling, which is 2.5, 3 hours away from my parents, he wouldn't do that. So I had to learn it myself, or ask friends, or watch YouTube tutorial. And again, I just think that that made me a lot more independent and helped me develop towards, being a independent and somewhat successful adult. So that's one aspect. But another one is that every time you move abroad, you can reinvent yourself. You can choose new friends. You can discard old habits that you had by putting yourself in an entirely new environment. And you will also learn every single time from the people you live with, if you live in a flat share, which I always did, from the new school system or university system you're in, from the different, eating habits, culture, everything. Every time you move, you expose yourself to new environment. And the nice thing is that you can typically, obviously, if you're moving for some bad reason, I don't know, a war going on or something and you're a refugee, that's complete, I'm not talking about that. But if you're like myself, making a deliberate decision to move somewhere, and you can learn, but ultimately decide to come back to the place that you most like, which for me happened to be Munich for the time being, I think that is super valuable, because you're taking all the learnings with you, and then you can decide where you actually want to live. Voila. So move a lot and move far. Right. So next thing I did right, I think, is investing into some of my core childhood friendships. And by that I mean I have one friend, Moritz, whom I've been friends with since I'm 3 months old. And I'm an only child, so I don't have any siblings. And Moritz is probably one of my closest friends, even though our lives now are so different that you could probably barely describe it. I mean, I studied, I moved abroad, I'm all over the place now. And he stayed in the area, did an apprenticeship, did very well at it, did a couple of things on top. I don't know the English word for it, but kept educating himself. He now has a lovely partner. They have a dog. They were just renovating a house. But you just see how different that is. And nevertheless, we both, and I cherish this a lot in him as well, and some other friends from the time that I have, he also makes an effort to keep the friendship alive. We see each other regularly. I'm still very close with his parents, but I also make sure to every now and then check in. When I'm here, I ring him up. I'm like, hey, do you want to go for lunch? And stuff like that. And it's the same thing for my longest school friend, Maggie, whom I've posted about previously on Instagram. Because if I'm in a shit place and I just want to call someone and cry on the phone, they are the people that I'm calling, because they know me. When we became friends, I didn't have any of the success and career stuff that I have now. So I know that he just likes me. He's like a brother, kind of, probably a bit different still, but one of the closest people I have, even though we see each other maybe twice a year, thrice a year. And yeah, so if you're lucky, like me, to have developed close friendships early on in your life, I think that it's worthwhile keeping them alive, even if sometimes it's awkward, even if sometimes you have to, make space and time for it. But in the end, it's just so nice to keep them throughout your life. Yeah. And I hope that I will in the future. Who knows? And that brings me to point 7, which is my choice to never, ever prioritize a relationship over my core friendships. Now, let me explain. What I don't mean by that is that you should not occasionally make priorities based on your relationship with a partner. Because evidently, if they are your partner for that time and point, they are your closest person. Probably, unless you have siblings or you're very close to your parents, but they are your life partner, right? So it's natural that you prioritize your life with them. But to me, this is very different from your potential partner, which has happened to me. asking me to distance myself from one of my core friends, or even expressing jealousy towards one of my friends if they were female. And I have always made the choice to make it very, very, very clear that I will not abandon or change an existing friendship for a relationship. And I've literally told partners this before, where I was like, if you have a problem with me still being friends, platonic friends, with person X, that is okay, but I'm not going to change that. And you either live with that or you don't, because they've been my friend for 6 years. We've been together for 5 months. They've helped me for countless situations. I'm not just going to abandon them or stop seeing them. And if your partner is someone that just gets jealous very easily or whatever, I think you can find a consensus. Like I would probably not need to have a one-on-one candlelight dinner with my friend whilst I'm in a relationship with that given partner. But I can have a lunch, I can go for a walk, I can maybe even go to a convention, and I choose to not let anybody tell me to not be friends with my friends, because typically they've been there for longer, they'll probably be there for longer, unless it's your life partner. But yeah, personally, I just choose to not let anyone dictate what I can do. And also, ideally, your partner should trust you anyway, to just be a good person and to tell the truth, and that you can openly articulate if there is something in the bush, which hopefully there isn't. But if there is, if you have a fully grown up mature partner, I think you should just be able to talk about it. Next learning was a harsh realization that I had, I think around the age of 15 or 16, listening to Gary Vaynerchuk, another motivational guy from the US. Because historically, I haven't been great at school or learning, studying. My grades weren't great. And I had always believed that you're just good at some things and you're just not so good at other things. I was always good at languages, English, French, etc. And I was never really good at math. It never came naturally to me. And what I heard quite a lot is oh, he's like a math guy, about other people, or he's good at physics and it just comes easily to them. And so I had just assumed that, okay, I'm not a maths guy, I'm a language guy. And that's sort of the belief that I held until, I don't remember if it was a podcast or if it was a book, but until I came across this piece by Gary Vaynerchuk, where he basically said that he for himself had at some point realized that he is not that smart, which is a funny thing to say about yourself, because most people are full of themselves, or at least some. And that because of this realization that he wasn't that smart, he had just concluded that he would have to work harder than everybody else to compensate for his lack of IQ or intelligence. And for some reason, probably because I'm not that smart either, that really stuck with me. And I subsequently just started looking at things differently and realizing that, okay, maybe I'm not that good at maths by nature, but I can still look at a maths exercise, understand the pattern behind it, and then cram that pattern into my head and repeat exercises until I fucking get it, right? And so entering 11th grade, which is when in the Bavarian schooling system, the grades start to count towards your high school diploma, I just started putting a lot more effort into school, and voila, all of a sudden, I went from in German grading system, I went from nearly failing classes and then a 2.5 in 10th grade to ultimately writing a 1.5 Abitur, so high school diploma. To translate it to American grading, that's probably going from a 2.7 to a 3.8, 3.7 to 3.8, I guess, in American system. So in plain language, I just went from being pretty bad to being pretty good. And all that I changed was to throw my belief that you were either good or bad at something out of the window and substituted it with the belief that you can just learn things and become good at them. And yeah, to summarize, it's I'm not that smart, so I'm just going to have to work harder than everybody else to become good at things. And I think that's still very true. to record this podcast. I did a bunch of research on how to use the iPhone and how to use the microphone. And I know that I'm not a person that has oh, sorry, I touched the mic. I know that I'm not a person that has a natural eye for photography. I just don't have an eye for aesthetics. But that doesn't mean I can't watch tutorials on YouTube and get a book on how to do picture composition, which settings in my camera to choose when, and then develop processes around that. Am I ever going to compete with the person that has the natural eye and does the work? No. I won't ever be able to compete with them, but I can still outcompete the 90% of people that either have talent but don't put in the work, or that don't have the talent but aren't willing to put in the work. It's as easy as that. And yeah, overall, also the rest of my life trajectory has just shown me that if you work your ass off, your likelihood of success, if you are lucky enough, again, which I think I am, to have a baseline of intelligence, grew up in the right system, etc., etc. There's obviously a lot of factors that you can't influence, but you can make the best out of what you have by just working hard and smart and improving over time. But I think the easiest variable to control is how much effort you put in, because that's entirely on you. Just be disciplined. Just do it. And I'm really good at that. I'm really fucking good at that. And I know that now, and I know to cherish it. And there's some other things that I'm still learning, such as what do I actually enjoy and am I good at, etc., etc. And maybe we'll talk about that on another episode. But just, yeah, realizing that hard work can get you a long way, even in things that you're not talented in. Very, very useful. Okay, penultimate one. I chose to be friends with the weird kids. And this is something I mostly realized after moving back to the US, because, and I love all of you, but most of the friends that I'm still friends with, they're a bit weird, and I am too. And the reason why I like that is because if you're weird, you're probably deviating from society's norm in some way, shape, or form. You're probably rather being yourself than pretending to be someone you're not. And I think that is not a, don't want to call it a trap, but it's a pattern that you can fall into when you try to fit in and like try to be cool. It's like you end up doing things that you don't really want to do. Like I never really cared about fashion, and I've dabbled into it for like half a day a few times, and I always realized like it's not for me. I don't like it. It doesn't bring me joy, you know? And similarly, I like the person that just shows up in their weird Christmas sweater and is really into politics and then can talk to me about it and like is way smarter than I am, rather than the person that's like polished and like interested in all the things that are currently trendy. If that is what you actually like, I also love that. But basically what I'm saying is I like the people that are real, that are just themselves, that are admitting to their flaws and that don't try to be like this ideal representation of what you're supposed to be. And if that includes some flaws, fine. And I love that. I love my friends. I have so many good friends, which is really cool. And yeah, I cherish when friends develop into that direction, and when they dare to go, you know, to explore their interests or to take some risks. Like that's always very fun to see. All right, the last thing that I think I did right is that I'm 26, and so far I haven't stepped into a single pitfall with enormous consequences for my life, and that is because I was quite careful to avoid them. And what I mean by that is risks that you take that have the potential to result in irreversible, large-scale consequences. To give a few examples, if you're doing a backflip on your skis and you're not really prepared for it, you might fuck up your spine and never walk again. If you sleep with someone and you're not smart about protection, you might as well have a baby running around, because it's typically, if you're a male, their choice if they want to keep the baby or not. And all of these things will have an impact on your life forever. They are not reversible, and they significantly shape what your life looks like. And so I have always erred on the side of caution with these things. And honestly, for these specific risks of that magnitude, I think that I'm thankful that I did. The reason why I'm so hesitant to say it, and this leads to probably the area of where I think I didn't do things the right way in my life, which maybe is the next episode or another one, is that there are also areas where I could have taken a lot more risk, because any risk that is easily reversible, doesn't have long-term consequences, etc., etc., I think you should take when you're young, and you should try things such as recording this podcast, which some people might go like, oh, why are you recording a podcast? Why are you talking about your life lessons? You're a nobody. Okay, say that. Maybe this is my first and last episode ever. Fine, who cares? What's the impact of it? Maybe a few people think I'm weird, recording myself here in the nature in Freising, where nobody does stuff like that. But that's like a low risk. It is very different from not being able to walk again or having a kid, which is a monetary, emotional, etc. burden for your entire life. And back to my point earlier, if you love skiing, like, because that's an example I gave, and you prepare for it, and you're like, okay, that's a risk I'm willing to take, go for it. I just think that you should be you should make these choices very consciously, and be aware of the ramifications before you make a decision, not run into it without thinking about it and then have to live with the consequences. And now that concludes the first episode of my podcast. And I really want to thank you for watching this far if you did. As I said in the beginning, if you have any feedback, be it on the audio or the way I talk or the things I share or what you'd be interested in, please let me know. That way I can be better next time. And also, if you do feel comfortable to share any of your thoughts or insights, I think that will also be cool if you want to. And if not, and either way, have a blessed day. Thank you for listening, and hopefully see you in episode 2 at some point in the near future. Peace. Oh my God, I just recorded my first podcast. Holy fuck, that was fun. Nice.